that I believe that the evidence would show, if you pay attention to the permits that have been offered here, that most of them came from the same financial and otherwise ownership in this area. They're all the ones that don't property were the same financial interests, upper class white, however you need to say it. I encourage you to make a finding on that.
Is this sort of playing the race card? Is that what we're doing here?
Action?
Is this affirmative action, or what are we talking about here, David? You opened her up.
I'll glad to answer that question. I'm going to read the regulation again because I didn't write it. It's important to you.
Well, let me ask you a question before we start here. Is not, and I'm thinking out loud here, is not the overall membership of, and regardless of whether it's black or white or brown or pink people, the overall diversity of a membership role that they've gone out and people that have been solicited or people that have wanted to join, does that not provide diversity? I think that's the diversity that I'm looking for, is diversity in membership. I don't want to judge people on their race. I mean, I don't want to do that.
I'm not asking you to judge them on their race. This says lack of diversity in ownership and financial interests. Basically, what I'm telling you is we don't know anything about the diversity in ownership and financial interests in this. You have to consider that in your decision. That's my point. It has nothing to do with race or anything else. It has to do with the fact that they didn't present anything, you don't know anything, and you must consider that in your decision. Now, with that in the record, I'm going to move on.
Well, wait a minute. I don't think that we can have, by federal statute and law, I don't think you can go out and ask people to sign up for an organization and say, okay, you're either black or you're either white or you're Chicano or Mexican. That flies in the face of federal law.
Mr. Fuller, I'm not telling you anything about race. I'm reciting your
Well, diversity in my opinion, David. We're talking about race.
Okay, here's the thing, Mr. Fuller. This is the language that I'm reading in your regulation.
Just a minute. Would you guys listen to this argument down here if you don't mind? Help me out here.
I didn't come up with the regulation. I'm simply arguing your regulation against in this very case. I didn't come up with it. I didn't write it. I don't have an opinion or even a standing to talk about the constitutionality under the federal or anything else. All that I'm saying in this hearing is that this board has a regulation that says that you consider diversity in ownership and financial interest in the geographic area at issue, and you have no evidence before you on that issue here today. That's my point. That's all my point is.
Okay, and then I'm going to allow my counsel here, my learned counsel, to address this as well.
This is state law, by the way, and we mirrored it on this one.
Okay.
We didn't just bring this up.
Okay. Would you speak up so they can put this in the record?
When an application is submitted to this board, your attorneys must first view the charter to make sure the nonprofit charter run has been in existence for years. And also that there's a certain and sufficient number of members of that particular organization before they will deem it the application complete. That has been done. And you talk about diversity, if you've got in excess of 100 members, and the language in the regulation does not define diversity, but if you've got over 100 members of the same, there's going to be some diversity in those 100 members, period.
Well, that is basically what I'm making a statement to that effect. I think 100, you gather up 100 people, usually they're pretty diverse.
And what I'm saying, Mr. Chairman, he says it's not in the record. The approval of the application and the verification by the attorneys of the charter being in existence and also the members being in excess of 100 is in and of itself in the record.
Well, if there's one thing we've tried to do is keep this board from, trying to reflect on people's race. We granted a permit to an alternative gay women's club this morning, so I think we African American gay women's club. So I think we're pretty diverse. Let our counsel say something first here. I think we were. I don't care, whichever one of you wants to get in the barrel.
Mr. Chairman, I'd have to go back and look at exactly and get more information as to the history of this when this law was passed, but it was particularly addressing the interest of ownership. I mean, that's a salient word here, is ownership by one person or financial entity of all the permits in the area. And I would suggest to you that you granted the permits up there, you've heard the application, this board can take notice that there's diversity. You got different nonprofits, different memberships. All you got to do, it doesn't say you're bound by anything other than you consider. You consider, you granted them, you know, you've heard the different applications, they're diverse. That's a simple finding. And you don't have to find anything other than it says you got to consider. And you consider it. You certainly take knowledge of the actions of this agency. You did.
Well, I would very much like anybody then that makes a motion on this to, as Mr. Hogue has requested, to mention in there that based on other findings or other, that they consider this application as such.
Back to my summation.
Thank you.
First thing I'm going to do in my summation, resuming in my summation, is promise the holder's argument that I'll move on to the factors. The response is that when you talk about financial interest in the geographic area and diversity of ownership and financial interest, we also, you should pay attention to the fact that this is not a restaurant that's going to attract, as the testimony has shown, this is not a restaurant that's going to attract the lower class, the lower financial class, all that kind of, those types of people. It's the upper class, it's the upper scale restaurant, and I think that goes against the very argument that if you have 100 people, you're going to have your diversity of ownership. I don't think that's true at all, but that's a closing argument. You take it for what it's worth. Now, number one on the factors, the number of existing alcohol beverage permits, and number two, the types of existing alcohol beverage permits. You have 3 in a 2-block area. This would be number 4 in a 2-block area. As it was mentioned in testimony just recently, you found that this same board found that just because one restaurant was across the street from another, that area was adequately served. I ask you, I appeal to your logic in using that same logic here as you have once before.
Mr. Chairman, I mean, again, this is not an evidence. I mean, I object, and he can testify or make an argument about what's been put in evidence, but that's not an evidence about what you did on some other application.
Well, let's just sum up.
In fact, I would argue that it goes against that we have to look at the examples that are laid out in this case and not, yeah. So, I've done that out.
I understand, and I'm not, your job is not to throw anything that I say out, or your job is to accept everything and give it appropriate.
What's to listen to it and give it appropriate?
That's what I'm saying.
Go right ahead. Finish up.
Next is suitability of location of proposed outlet, including such factors as possible traffic hazards, traffic congestion, remoteness of area, degree of law enforcement available, and so forth. Mr. Hogue started the petitioner's case by saying that there were parking problems here, and it was promptly denied and tried to backtrack by the very next witness after that. As far as suitability of proposed building, including such factors as type of building, building condition, building security, you've heard nothing about that whatsoever. I'm sure the petitioner would argue, or the applicant would argue, that this is all a matter of the file in the very beginning. I don't believe this board's job is to simply look at the file and accept everything that's in it. This board is, you denied the application based on what was in the file, and you've heard nothing to tell you about the suitability of the proposed building, including factors such as the building condition and so forth at this hearing. So you certainly wouldn't overturn your decision based on number 4. Potential impact on proposed outlets on churches and schools in the area. We stipulate there aren't any churches and schools specifically affected by this. However, you've heard or seen letters from numerous mayors and justices of peace, and you have a total of 4,181 signatures against this, some of which is based on the potential impact on city youth ministries. Input from law enforcement officials and other public officials. You have letters swarming at this point from justices of the peace, mayors in Craighead County. We did not go outside Craighead County. We stayed within Craighead County. And I don't know that you have hardly anything on the other side from law enforcement or from elected officials. The best you've done here from elected officials on the other side is to bring in a gentleman that I certainly extend all the respect I can to him for his position, but he is no longer an elected official for this area as far as I can tell. And he has an opinion that's worth the same amount as any other civilian citizen. Finally, you have opposition and support comments from adjacent property owners or nearby area residents to any application. I want you to realize that you have, I think it was 70 signatures in favor on petition. Some of those signatures were from outside Craighead County. Some of those signatures were from inside Craighead County. That was in favor of. In opposition, you have 4,181 signatures in opposition. I would concede that probably some of those are from outside Craighead County. But if you add up all of the people, both here and having written letters or signed petitions in favor of this application, they are swamped by just the petitions alone against. That should speak volumes to this board. There are 4,000 people plus that say that public convenience and advantage would be served by denying this. There are approximately, I think, less than 200 people who are in favor of this because it will bring more money into their pockets. That's a small, minute element of public convenience and advantage, and I ask you to treat it as such.
Thank you, Mr. Hogue. Reverend Jason, I think all of us on this board can certainly see and I hope you can see the dilemma that this board really does face, because there is a law on the books, no matter how much you dislike it or I dislike it, and I'm beginning to dislike it a lot, that is actually out there as private club law that makes accommodations in dry counties for people who want to imbibe, who want to partake socially and do these things. The legislature expanded that law, and that's why we are dealing more now with restaurants. We've been doing this in Northwest Arkansas, they are blissfully happy with the way this law works. They've got hundreds of private club restaurants up there. I don't know if and when your community will ever get blissfully happy or blissfully unhappy, but I would certainly join you in saying that, and maybe it's by reducing the overall threshold. There's an unrealistic threshold, as we all know out there now, to have a vote for a wet and dry election. It's 38%.
Mr. Commissioner, that's debatable whether that's unrealistic or not. It may be high.
Well, as you know, there was
38% that voted in the last
in the last election.
So that narrows your universe down by 62%.
Yeah. Granted, there was just a county just went wet. But anyway, with that said, and I'm sort of just making a statement that the legislature certainly, I think, needs to deal with where we're at in this process.
I could not agree with you more.
All right. So, in the case of Daniel Johnson, Brickhouse Inc. on 218 South Main in Jonesboro, refused by the director, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I will make a motion. I'd like to make a motion to overturn the director's decision based on the following criteria. Number one, I was very much impressed with Bobby Hester's count of people going to restaurants down there. If my calculations are correct, and I went back and re-added it up after Sam Hilber made it, it's probably closer to $40.25, and you're right, it's almost $2 million in the economy. So I think it's a boon to the Jonesboro economy. Also, I keep hearing about city youth, and quite frankly, I have not had one specific example of anything that has happened to that facility that has been caused by these restaurants. There's cities all over the country, right here in Little Rock and in various other places, that have youth-type facilities right up the street from a restaurant, and you know, we have not had any mass murders right there. The business community is fully in support of this in Jonesboro. I didn't have any legislators that were opposed to it. We've gotten a letter from Mr. Brett Davis, who sent his standard form letter, and once again, somebody needs to educate this guy on what the law is. Maybe somebody can have a seminar for him. But again and again, I mean, using the words of David here, who I respect a lot, but you know, this is American, it is free enterprise, and David, quite frankly, I believe that these people have the right to start a business and make a opportunity for themselves. I do find as a finding of fact that diversity of ownership was considered. It was considered when the application went in, and you and your side had no evidence to the contrary. So, for all these reasons, Mr. Chairman, I find that this is in the best interest of the public, and it is in the best interest of the convenience of the community.
We've had a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
No. Chairman votes aye. By a vote of 4-1, the permit is granted, appealable to Circuit Court. Thanks everybody for coming, and Merry Christmas. We're in recess for 5 minutes.